What up, Wizards? It's Dev from The Place, and today is a good day. I didn't even have to use my AK. We have all got a reason to be cheesing because Wizards decided to do the right thing, swooping in and saving Standard, or at least I think that, and it seems like a lot of other people think so too, by banning 7 cards. We've obviously got a lot to talk about, so let's get to it.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back to witness the biggest Standard culling possibly of my lifetime. Definitely the largest one in recent or even distant memory. 7 cards is ridiculous, and we might as well go ahead and tell you what all of them are. We're going to talk about each card individually, but I also don't want to waste too much of your time by you being like, well, what's the next card that got banned, Dev? I don't want to read the article. I just want to watch the video. So with that in mind, Cori Steel Cutter is banned. Monstrous Rage is banned. Heartfire Hero is banned. But that's not all. Up the Beanstalk, Gonzo, Hopeless Nightmare, Dunsky, This Town Ain't Big Enough, Sayonara, and Abuelo's Awakening too. Aloha. It means both hello and goodbye. All of these cards are gone now. That is a lot of cards to take in. So let's go over each card and kind of talk about why they discussed banning them and how we all feel about them, or at least me sitting on my couch. First of all, Cori Steel Cutter. It's pretty clear that this is the card they were most concerned with. It's the one they addressed first, and it's the one they used the most words to do so. Now, a lot of it kind of boiled down to meta share and how much the format has warped around this card since it came out. And those are true things, but they also had this little bit about how, like, let's be clear, this is the kind of action we would take during any of our ban windows. And technically, there's a little ban window after each set comes out, but they didn't ban the card after Tarkir Dragonstorm came out. Right, so that's kind of interesting, but that's probably because they knew that they had a yearly ban announcement coming up. They just kind of wanted to wait, see how things shook out. But not only did they end up banning Cutter, they actually said, like, you know, let's ban 6 additional cards. Have a little fun with it. Something else they focused on that I thought was interesting, because they focused on this property of the card in another banning, a card we'll talk about later, and there's even a little end note about this in terms of design philosophy moving forward towards the end of the article. We'll talk about that later, but they focused a lot on the fact that Cori Steel Cutter is just difficult to answer one for one, right? If they get the monk, then you can take out the Cutter. That's good news for you, but they still have the monk, you know? So if you took one card to answer the Cutter or the monk, they'll just get another monk if they still have the Cutter, and there's problems inherent just in the design of this card and how cheap it is to get on the table in the first place. And again, they kind of focused on that a little later down the road with a different card they banned. So it looks like going forward in design philosophy, they're going to try to get away from these cards that are not necessarily difficult to answer, but difficult to answer on a one-for-one basis. Now, at the end of the day, personally, I did think Cutter needed to go. I was on the fence about it last week a little bit, but then the Pro Tour happened, and I was like, all right, get this trash out of here. I think most people are of the opinion that this is one of the top cards that needs to be banned. So I'm glad that they listened to us, at least on this level, but they listened to us on a level I didn't think they would. Let me say that, man. It's almost not fair that I support this ban. I honestly would have supported even more bans. You know, I'm just that kind of guy. I like bans in general. I like when they shake up Standard and all that. So, you know, I'm not necessarily an unbiased voice on this. I support, spoiler alert, every single ban they made today. So on a personal level, this section of the video is going to be basically the same for every card we talk about. Do I want this to be banned? Sure, why not? Get it out of here. Now, Monstrous Rage banned as well. This is the card that I kind of figured would be most eligible for the hammer. Like, almost certainly. And here we are. I did not expect that they would do what they did. Put it that way. I thought there was a chance that Monstrous Rage would be the only card banned, and last week this time I was thinking it might be the only card in Standard that literally needs to be banned. It just invalidates blocking, combos too well with Double Strike, which is a real concern when Manifold Mouse is just scurrying around in the format. So this just does too much for the aggro decks. You know, it invalidates not just blocking, but like having other creatures like on the other side of the table to do basically anything against aggro. You know, you don't want to swing sideways because you want to leave open to block, but when you go to block, you're just going to get run over, and it's only 1 mana. This is maybe the most powerful pump spell ever printed in a lot of ways, and Wizards even acknowledged that in the ban announcement. You know, they basically said they got a kick out of the idea of having a pump spell be really, really good in Standard, and it was for like a year and a half. So I think we've all had about enough of that, and Wizards says, cool, we'll pull the plug on it. They also had a fun little line in there where they said that it's banned in the interest of decreasing the least fun, aggressive play patterns in Standard. I like that they just came right out and said it. That's the first step to recovery. Now, aggro does still have its options for really good pump spells. They just keep printing them. Monstrous Rage wasn't the only one. There's Wild Ride, which saw a little bit of Pro Tour play, even in decks that only had 3 copies of Rage. You would think this would be copies like 5 and 6, but no, it was actually just 3 Rage and 2 copies of Wild Ride in a few lists, including the one that showed up in the finals, if I'm not mistaken. So this card is actually a really, really good sort of pump spell for any of these mice decks. You know, you'll still be able to get in for a bunch of damage with double strike off Manifold Mouse, but you just won't be able to trample over. And I do think that's kind of a huge deal. You'll still be able to use Turn Inside Out to get a bunch of, value and a decent pump spell out of the deal. Dreadmaw's Ire is halfway decent. Like, there are good red pump spells in the environment, but one of the problems is that we mono red players also lost Heartfire Hero. Now, they do have Cacophony Scamp still in the format, but it's not a mouse. It doesn't have the Valiant trigger, which is a big deal with things like Manifold Mouse and Rockface Village and whatnot. So it is kind of a massive deal to lose one of the 3 blind mice from the mice package in Standard. And it's not just the mice decks that take a hit, it's also like these Callous Sellsword decks, which are sometimes one and the same with the mice decks, but often you'll see 4 Cacophony Scamp, 4 Heartfire Hero, 4 Callous Sellsword, nowadays 2 Self-Destruct. And I think those decks take a massive hit by not having Heartfire Hero. But just in general, the mono red decks are probably going to go back to playing Swift Spear until it rotates, and then they're going to have to find a different 1-drop, and that's actually way, way easier said than done. Will we see maybe goblins see some play for a while? Are lizards back on the menu as like a really good Rakdos, low to the ground aggro deck that doesn't have to play any of the cards that got banned, and it's kind of fine. So again, it's not that aggro is like completely off the menu, but this sort of like really overpowered kill you on turn 3 aggro is not necessarily a thing of the past. I want to warn you of that, but it is definitely not as much of a reality as it was yesterday, and that is massive. I don't necessarily think, again, I'm trying to be cautious here and advise you to be so as well, that I don't know that mid-range is just the best deck in the format again now, and we can pick back up all of our 4 and 5 drops and just play with them again. There are still some real decks in the format that'll kill you relatively early in the game through combo or aggro means. So as much as I want to say, the king is dead, long live the king, let's all pick back up our Bizas and go for it, I'm just not sure that we're quite there, although I do kind of hope that mid-range Magic is back, and there's reason to believe that it could be, even outside of banning just the mono red cards, because they also banned Abuelo's Awakening today. Now, I was kind of hoping that they would hit the payoff. Like Foundations is a set that's going to stay in Standard for, they say, at least 5 years, and the at least is sounding more and more ominous as the days go on, man. Omniscience is going to be with us for a long time, and there's still a lot of ways to, be able to get it out. And this keeps them from sort of being able to print, decent 4 mana reanimation that can hit enchantments and stuff like for the next 5 years. So we'll kind of see how all that works out. They said themselves, we had kind of hoped that making the enchantment into like a 1/1 creature would provide some counterplay options, which makes a lot of sense with most enchantments in the format, but not necessarily Omniscience, right? So again, I was hoping they would hit the payoff and not necessarily the setup here, but looks like we still have Omniscience in Standard. For now, at least. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but in any case, I guess they're hoping that stuff like Yuna, Hope Obscura is more easy to interact with, because it is, and it costs that extra mana, which is kind of a big deal. I think we still have, Repair and Recharge and Campus Renovation. Like, there are 5 mana things that can reanimate enchantments in this Standard, but is a whole extra turn not good enough? Well, I will say, when you cut the legs out from under the best aggro deck in Standard, Yuna becomes a better choice. So I'm a little bit worried that the Omniscience deck is still really good, but I think they think that slowing down the Omniscience deck by a turn is going to be a big deal in calming it down. That said, if you do play Yuna, Hope Obscura, now you're Bant Omniscience, so you've got Lawn War Elves and other ramp effects in green to get that combo on turn 4, right? So maybe it's a little less reliable. Maybe there's that. So all I'm saying is that there's definitely still ways to get Omniscience, multiple ways to get Omniscience on like turn 4 in Standard, that I'm a little bit wary of this banning, but I'm still happy at the end of the day that they did something to address the Omniscience threat, because this is still a deck that kills you on turn 4, and sometimes in more ways than aggro. I'm not going to say that definitively, but in some ways, in more ways than aggro, this keeps mid-range decks out of the format. Mid-range deck can sweep the board, play their Biza, remove that guy, and then they're kind of fine until they can drop an Overlord of the Mistmores or like something huge, right? But when it comes to, the mid-range matchup versus Omniscience, it's more or less hopeless because you can dirtle all you want. They're just going to kill you on turn 4 or 5, right? So... I'm, again, not too sure about which card they banned to take out the Omniscience decks, but I'm glad something was done. And by the way, if you did want to build mid-range again, well, you've just lost one of your best card advantage options. Up the Beanstalk is finally banned, I guess, question mark. It hasn't really been too big of a force in the format lately, but obviously it's got a world championship and a pro tour under its belt. This deck has done more than fine over the last couple of years, and Beans itself has been banned in Modern for 2 years now, so we finally get a standard banning. This card was not going to rotate. I keep seeing some sort of confusion about that. This card had a whole other year left in Standard to kind of dominate, and I imagine it would have. There's a lot of reasons that they gave for this one, one being that I like this line. They expect that the deck building puzzle of Up the Beanstalk has been solved so many times at this point that we expect it would become more monotonous than engaging as time rolls on. And I thought that was a good line, honestly. A lot of introspection on that one. They are absolutely right. But in any case, they also said that they've kind of been feeling the crunch, the Beans crunch, while designing cards that'll be legal and standard with the card for the next year or so. Every time you make a 5-drop or a cost reduction card that technically costs 5, but you can pay less for it, you have to remember that it triggers Beans. And if anything, I'm going to be happy that I don't have to take that 3-second pause during every previous season video where any card that's a 5-drop or higher for any reason, cost reduction be damned. I have to be like, well, it does trigger Beans. You have to say it or the whole comment section is going to be like, Beans? I should just leave it. I should never say Up the Beanstalk. I guess it's over now, but what I should have done is never said that anything triggers Beans and gotten a bunch of engagement in the comment section. But anyway, man, Beans is gone, and honestly, I'm pretty happy about that. This card has definitely had its day, and even though this does hit a couple of decks in the format that kind of did nothing wrong, like Golgari Graveyard, which just plays a bunch of drafty 5/5s that technically cost 7 mana, but really they only cost 1 black, That deck is actually really fun and really good, and again, did 0 things wrong in its entire life, but it does have a really good win percentage, even in a world full of Cori Steel Cutters and mice and stuff, so maybe if we didn't ban Beans, that deck would become amazing. There's also the Tolarian Terror, Eddie Merc Crab, Storm Chaser's Talent, This Town Ain't Big Enough, this card deck. That deck lost 2 cards, and again, it never really did nothing to nobody, and I kind of feel bad about that, but again, Beans needed to go. We need other sources of card advantage that can actually, not necessarily outclass this, but we need to not worry about this as a source of card advantage, so we can actually open up other sources of card advantage we haven't played with at all or in a while. I imagine maybe the Caretaker's Talent deck gets slightly better after this banning, but again, we'll have to wait and see. Either way, I'm pretty happy about this one. This is also a card, by the way, just like Cori Steel Cutter. This is the other card that they basically said, well, it generates value the turn it comes into play, so even if you can blow it up, they still drew a card off of it, right? Or maybe they got some sort of enchantment into the play of the battlefield effect off of it. There's a lot of ways to generate value off this, and the moment they draw a second card off of it, or you can play Get Lost on it or something, and they just paid 2 mana to draw 2 cards and get 2 map tokens and a card out of your hand, which is a crazy deal on their end. So, it's just a little bit too much to actually have to deal with on a 1-for-1 basis. So, again, another card like that, and they even sort of address this later on. Let me read this little paragraph here because I think it's really important. We need to scrutinize and be careful with the rate of cards that are challenging to interact with favorably. With the increased power level of decks in the larger format that is 3-year standard, decks are very capable of turning a small advantage into a snowball that ends the game. Strong cards that leave resources behind when dealt with, like Cori Steel Cutter and Up the Beanstalk, reliably create that first small advantage. Identifying these cards and evaluating their strength in the context of their interactional requirements is a task that play design is incorporating into our process going forward. So it looks like we just won't be seeing as many cards that are hard to interact with or leave behind value when interacted with. And I think that's actually kind of one of the biggest parts of this announcement. Now, as part of that, they also addressed that, one drops are too powerful, and the larger a format gets, the more things coalesce around the best one drops in the format. And honestly, I kind of think that even though this was left unsaid, a lot of people have made the comment, myself included, that Standard is a lot like playing Modern nowadays. It's not a turn 4 format, it's a turn 3 format. Sometimes a turn 2 format, depending on what's going on. If a opponent goes Heartfire Hero into Manifold Mouse and you can't answer that, they've still got 5 cards in their hand and one's a Monstrous Rage, you're basically dead right there. So, the fact that they also addressed that they're not going to print as many basically busted one drops. They acknowledge that when you power creep the one drop slot, things get a little bit nasty. And even though this is a huge Standard environment, basically every card that costs like 4.5 mana or greater is locked out of seeing any real play. And that is not a thing that they want. So it also seems they're going to address one drop design moving forward and maybe not power creep them so much, which again, I think is good news. A return to fair Magic is something I've wanted for a few years. But we're not done with bans. I brought up This Town Ain't Big Enough just a moment ago, and they banned that card out from under a lot of decks here too. I kind of like this ban in a sneaky way. I think that maybe the better ban would have been Storm Chaser's Talent. Make sure that the Izzet deck is gone for good, even though it's still got Vivi and all that. Take away a couple of really important tools to it. And I guess This Town Ain't Big Enough is a fairly important tool for the Izzet decks. It gets that loop going with Storm Chaser's Talent, where they can keep getting cards back from their graveyard, or they can get to This Town Ain't Big Enough back from their yard, do it again, keep interaction on their side of the table, make some tempo happen while still forwarding their game plan, which is something that Wizards acknowledged here was a little too powerful for some of these Izzet decks. Now, at the end of the day, I do think it's interesting that they addressed how powerful they are making one drops and didn't ban maybe the most powerful one drop in Standard. I think that Storm Chaser's Talent is up there with Heartfire Hero in terms of like the best one drops you can possibly play. And it is interesting too that this card kind of works on both axes that they talked about, play design moving forward is going to address. Not only is it a busted one drop, but it also leaves behind value even if interacted with. And in this case, it usually costs more mana to interact with than it costs to play in the first place, which is kind of a huge no-no for fair Magic. So again, I'm a little surprised that Storm Chaser's Talent didn't get hit here, maybe even alongside This Town, but I guess they figure they only have to ban one of these two cards, and maybe they'd rather ban the lower rarity one. That's a weird, I don't know if that's the case, but still, Storm Chaser's Talent is a ridiculously powerful Magic card, and I can understand why they made the choice they did, because this is the best interaction with it in Standard, but again, I may have liked to have seen something else. Just like the Omniscience ban, I would have liked to have seen a different card maybe banned here, but it is what it is. And I think that this will kneecap most of the Izzet decks moving forward and take away like their most annoying late game loop. They can be an aggro deck, but they can't be a mid game or a mid range like late game engine deck at the same time. And that's what This Town gives them the ability to do. So I'm kind of glad they've wiped that. But of course, hitting This Town also hits the Pixie decks pretty hard. I am a little surprised that they didn't hit Nurturing Pixie or any of these cards that they printed in the last few sets, but maybe that's what they decided. If we hit Pixie, Fear of Isolation, the one from freaking Tarkir Dragonstorm, or Ambrosia Whiteheart from Final Fantasy, if we hit any of these cards, there are more waiting in the wings to kind of take their place. So let's hit their best options. Not only This Town Ain't Big Enough, but also, and this is really interesting considering Orzhov Pixie has been more popular on MTGO lately than Esper Pixie, they have also hit Hopeless Nightmare. Now, this also goes to the, plays into the busted one drops argument they would make later. It kind of plays into the card that leaves too much value behind, argument in a way too. But yet another kind of really, really good one drop from this environment. And it lets them ban a card that, again, is lower rarity. They don't really have to care about the wild card situation or anything like that. But Hopeless Nightmare is, again, just like Storm Chasers and Heartfire Hero. This is on the short list of best one drops in Standard, especially when you get to play it like 5 times in the same game, which is really, really common. And it only costs a couple of mana to do that if you've got Nurturing Pixies. Just really strong plays, modern because of not modern. Standard, because of the mono red menace, and in some ways because of the incredibly efficient, like low to the ground Pixie package with Hopeless Nightmare, Nurturing Pixie, and a couple of other incredible like 1 or 2 mana cards, has felt like playing Modern. Standard has felt like playing Modern. All these incredibly efficient, low costed cards. No reason to play a card in your deck if it costs more than 2.5 mana. You know, we're gonna worry about playing these 3 drops, man. They have to be really good. Like Screaming Nemesis is good to see play in Standard. And I'm glad that they decided to sort of address that. I do think Hopeless Nightmare is the Pixie deck's, you know, best card in a lot of ways. It's its most annoying card. I guess they'll still have the 2 mana card from Tarkir Dragonstorm that comes down and drains 2. That's a fine card, but it does not take your answers away very early in the game and over, which I do like. So I support this ban. I hadn't really mentioned this in my 2 banning videos that we've done before today, but I had a lot of people in the comments section mentioning Hopeless Nightmare, and they were all absolutely right. On the low, I kind of like this card too much, so there is a part of me that's like, oh, but I understand why this needs to go, and I have been annoyed by it on plenty of occasions. Now, that is all of the bannings for today, but like I said, I could have taken a couple of more, you know. There's some really, really strong decks in Standard that didn't lose anything to these bans, but I think the good news is that rotation is around the corner, and most of these decks will lose something to the bans. Like, you might be worried about Dimir Control, really kind of a Dimir Flash mid-rangey kind of thing that's got a lot of really good tools. That deck is awesome, and it was at the top of the meta for a good long time, and it doesn't lose anything to this ban announcement, but it does lose its absolute best removal pieces, Cut Down and Go for the Throat, to rotation in just like a month. So I'd be worried about the Kaito deck, you know, on Arena for the next few weeks here. You know, Deep Cavern Bats are probably going to be freaking everywhere. That's still a really good card. It never wasn't, you know, but it's going to be even better nowadays. Maybe people don't play so much removal in their deck because they're not, you know, required to take out the turn 1 mouse, you know, no matter what. So again, that makes cards like Deep Cavern Bat better. It even makes cards like Kaito better in a lot of ways. So I would expect Dimir to be very good, but they are going to lose pieces to rotation. The deck that I'm kind of most worried about is Abhorrent Oculus. This doesn't lose much. I guess it might lose like Founding of the Third Path, if I'm not mistaken, I think. But it doesn't even always play that card. It doesn't lose like Picklock, Prankster, and a bunch of other cards that help it self-mill. Doesn't lose Helping Hand. Doesn't lose Abhorrent Oculus. So I think it doesn't lose Fear of Missing Out if you want to go Jeskai, and a lot of people do go Jeskai with the deck nowadays. So I think that, you know, we just got Starting Town. That makes the decks, you know, mana even better if you do want to go Jeskai. I think that Jeskai Oculus is maybe the best deck in Standard for the next month, but again, it's going to lose like 1 or 2 things to rotation, and we'll see if that makes a big enough difference. But for now, that's the card I'm dusting off if I want a ladder on Arena. It's definitely a proven deck that hasn't gotten to do its thing in a while, and as much as I want decks like, you know, Mono White or whatever to kind of come back, or maybe the Unholy Annex, like Orzhov Demons deck or something, is probably positioned really well at the moment now. You know, I think that these decks are probably very, very good once again. But again, if I had to sleeve something up for like a tournament this weekend, Oculus all the way. That's the only deck now that kind of feels like playing a modern deck in Standard, and that's very powerful. So again, if I had to choose one deck that's just like crazy now, it would probably be that one. But I've got a whole video coming out tomorrow about like the 10 cards that I think you should try now that these cards are banned, you know, and there's some spicy picks on that list. So stay tuned for that one, subscribe for it, do all the things, hit the button shaped like a thumb on your way out, and of course, let me know how you feel, man. This is a day for celebration for I think like 80% of the community, but I know there's going to be a fifth of you out there that just absolutely loathe this or something about it. You know, why'd they ban so much stuff and blah, blah, blah. I know there's going to be people out there, and I empathize. I really do, even though I'm happy about this. I know not everyone will be, so let me know all your thoughts and opinions down there. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of cheers and not too many jeers, but, you know, share your thoughts and feelings. This is a safe place. Anyway, y'all, I cannot wait to hear what y'all have to say about this, and I can't wait to talk more about it. And rotation happens soon, and it's a decent time to be a Standard player again for a while. It felt like a wasteland for a minute, but anytime a thing like this happens, I'm just happy to get like the brew juices flowing again, baby. I cannot wait to mess around in Standard again, because it feels like it's been too long since we got a real chance to do that. But anyway, I'm done yapping. Sorry, I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.